Mr. Johnston, it's good to see you again.
Good to be with you, Omar.
On the one hand, you've shut the door on a public inquiry because you say Canadians won't have access to sensitive, classified information. And at the same time, you've admonished the leaker or leakers because you say those leaks lack context and contribute to what you call misapprehension. Is there not a risk, though, that if you don't have a public inquiry, those leaks could increase?
There are two different questions there, Omar. First of all, the reason we can't have a public inquiry dealing with the question of who knew what, when, and what did they do with it is because to get at that, who done it, you have to deal with classified information. We can't disclose that classified information in the public realm, either for a hearing about it or a report that details that. And the reason for that is it's based on secure networks. Some of the sources we have whose lives would be at stake if this becomes an open matter that controls our relationship with our Five Eye allies and others. We share information that disappears. So much as we would like to have a public inquiry into this question of who knew what, so it can't be done in using classified information, and therefore you can't put it out on the public. What we do say is that there are accountability committees created by statute, the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency and the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliaments, both of which have an oversight role, both of which will review our report and the confidential annex and come to a conclusion as to whether we're right or wrong in our conclusions. They, of course, will face the same difficulty that when you get into classified information, you can't deal with in the public. So that's the dilemma we have in all public. What we do say is when we get into the challenges in our machinery of government, and there are some with respect to how we manage foreign influence, especially because it's grown so exponentially in the last 2 or 3 years, we have much work to do to improve it. In the second part of our mandate, the next 5 months, we will have public hearings to deal with precisely those things, and we hope to come up with recommendations that will be very helpful in improving our system.
I understand the dilemma that you're presenting, but
Right.
my question is, this decision that you have made, that was made public today,
Yes.
does it not embolden people who clearly want to say something, the leakers within the intelligence community, does it not embolden them to come out with even more information, which you admitted today is piecemeal, it lacks context, and could add to the misapprehension that you spoke about today?
Well, one cannot encourage and countenance leakers. These are people, if they're qualified security professionals, who are well educated, signed up to be part of the security establishment, took an oath to maintain total confidence on classified information, and under the Securities and Information Act are committing crimes when in fact they disclose that. One can't have a system like that that operates because our whole security intelligence apparatus begins to crumble and people's lives are at stake and we lose the ability to contribute with our Five Eyes. What I think people who feel that they have a real sense of grievance about our system is become private citizens and come and provide some testimony to us at our public hearings on what you think is wrong, or do a submission to us, and we'd be very glad to look at it. But you can't reform, I think, by encouraging people to break the law and then carry out their particular concern or protest. We must function through our democratic institutions, which do encourage a whole range of ideas on how we can improve our government.
Journalists, though, get information that is redacted from time to time,
Sure.
that they will then report on.
Yes.
Is there absolutely, unequivocally, no scenario where there could be a public inquiry where even some of the most sensitive information you talked about today is redacted to a certain extent, thereby achieving the goal of some transparency for the public, which obviously is very seized with this issue of foreign interference, and making sure that this information is out in the open? Was that scenario even entertained?
Well, I think the notion of redaction is possible, but then do you have enough in what's left to be able to come to an intelligent assessment? If the non-redacted part is left there on the line.
But how do we know that if that isn't even, it appears that the door was slammed on that even before that process was entertained, because you said today that Canada may also have a problem with overclassification too, right?
I think that should be examined. Can we be more relaxed in what we're doing in terms of what is classified and not classified? And other jurisdictions face the same problem, and I think we can learn from them. But there becomes an absolute line where you simply can't expose certain gathering of intelligence, and the difficulty with the leaked reports is based on only a partial understanding of the whole panoply of information. Even with documents that presumably have been taken from secret files, they only tell a part of the story. To come to an understanding of a real threat and act upon it usually involves many different pieces of information, usually gathered over a period of years, and very often drawing on the intelligence of our allies.
Could there have been a scenario where a process had been initiated to examine what could and what could not have been redacted first before shutting the door on a public inquiry completely?
Well, I think that process has been done with respect to what's classified and what isn't classified. In the documentation and the testimony that was given to us by security officials, they went, I think, as far as they could in trying to move that threshold of what must be secret and must not, more so than I've seen in any other circumstance. Nevertheless, it left a substantial body of evidence, which we have collected in our confidential report, which will be reviewed by the two committees I mentioned, to handle that. So yes, there's been some relaxation there. And one of the issues that we'll face in the next 5 months is, can we be more flexible with classified and declassifying information? Now, we don't want to declassify as President Trump suggested. I simply think it's declassified, and it is. We have something a little more robust than that. But that's just to illustrate that other of our allies have these problems in spades. And I think we can do a better job of trying to understand MI5 in the UK, the Australians who've been very enterprising in dealing with foreign threats, manage this difficulty of what you must keep in secret and trust us, and what you can put in the public realm. The one thing we can do, I think, to deal with that issue, Omar, is to be much more active in communication with the public. That foreign influence is real, it's pernicious, it's growing, it's very sophisticated, and the advent of digital media just puts us in a whole new world as to how we handle it.
Which we knew about, to be fair, before today's first report was revealed, right? The Public Safety Canada acknowledged that foreign interference poses one of the greatest strategic threats to Canada's national security. The intelligence gaps that you talked about in your report have been highlighted previously as well.
Yes.
So for the average Canadian out there, what are some of the fresh takeaways from the report today?
I think the fresh takeaway is that foreign influence is very real, pernicious, growing, not going to go away, and it does real danger. It especially does danger to our minority communities, our ethnic communities, who in many respects, and I think of the Chinese communities right now with Chinese influence, are victims of this and carry this burden of being, they're wonderful Canadian citizens. All of a sudden they're viewed with suspicion because of this foreign influence, which attempts to get at people and influence them one way or other. That's really an awful situation. And I think we must understand that there are influences at work that are trying to turn ourselves against one another with respect to that kind of thing. A lot of work to be done, public education, but I think we have to lead with our elected officials to bring this to the forefront and say it's real, it's tough, and here's what we're doing, and here's what we must do more effectively to be sure people understand what we're dealing with.
I think some people watching the press conference today or reading your report might be wondering what the action plan is.
Yes.
That you have acknowledged that it's a pernicious threat that challenges fundamental institutions in this country and democracy itself. Some of these issues have been highlighted before today's report. And yet, fundamentally, aside from the public hearings that you have outlined at some future date, what fundamentally changes tomorrow to address an urgent threat to Canada's democracy?
Well, we outline in the report about 9 different initiatives that have been taken over the past 3 or 4 years to deal with this growing threat. Beginning with the 2 committees I mentioned that are oversight committees created by legislation through Parliament, the Agency Review Committee and the Committee with respect to Security and Intelligence. They have an important watchdog role to lead our response to this. Of the 8 or 9 initiatives I've just mentioned, these have all come about in responding to a threat, but what happens is it's bigger and larger. And in the work we'll do in the next 5 months, and we expect parliamentary committees to be doing that as well, we'll be looking especially at how our allies are handling this problem and what we can learn from them. And as they would say, what they can learn from us.
Page 27 and 28, you outline how CISA sent a note to then Public Safety Minister Bill Blair and his Chief of Staff that China intended to target MP Michael Chong, but that neither the minister nor his Chief of Staff received that message because they did not have access to a top secret network to access that email. The Public Safety Minister did not have access to this top secret network. If intelligence officials can't even communicate that information, that basic level of information to elected officials, does it make our Five Eyes partners lose faith in Canadian intelligence?
That was a mistake. That was a problem in our machinery of government that should be rectified. Moreover, when that became understood, then the Minister of Public, the National Direct Securities Intelligence Advisor met with Mr. Chong to deal with that, and a new protocol was developed which said, as these threats ripen, but not necessarily crystallized into something that is clear and present danger, there must be a communication with those particular facts in moving into this secret territory with elected members of Parliament. So that protocol is now in place, but that's making policy on the fly. That's the kind of thing that should be done in a very considered way. And with respect to that issue, yes, our allies look at that and say, that's not acceptable, that your machinery of government is not providing a tracking of how that information goes up and what happens to it.
Mr. Johnston, last question. You know, your mandate officially ends in October. I know you were asked at several points today in the news conference. There has been a lot of attention placed on you know, your critics saying that you're too close to the Prime Minister, which you spoke about in today's press conference as well. Given that we are in a time when there is, you know, our institutions have been called into question and appearance and optics matter,
right.
Despite your credentials, do you think, or have you ever entertained a scenario where perhaps you step aside and have somebody else take on part two of this process?
Well, number one, Omar, when I was elected to do this, those who appointed me understood who I am and what my background is. With respect to the allegations of not being impartial and not being able to be nonpartisan, the friend of the current Prime Minister is simply this. When our daughters were about the same age as he, 11, 12, and his two brothers, we had a condo at the slopes of Mont Tremblant ski mountain within 100 meters of the actual trails. Their father had a country place at Morin Heights about 50 kilometers away from us. And on about 5 occasions over 2 or 3 years, came and parked his car at our parking space, and we went and skied for the day on the hill. So our children got to know one another when the current Prime Minister was 12 years old. On one of those occasions, he had to go back to Montreal, and I dropped the 3 boys off at their mother's country place with her second husband, which was about 10 kilometers. That's the distance. Those were the only occasions where I had direct meetings with the young Mr. Trudeau. He was a student at McGill, like 20,000 other students, and I waved at him from time to time. Between then and when he was elected to Parliament, and as Governor General I saw him on ceremonial things, I never had a meeting with him. I was never in his home. He wasn't in my home. We never exchanged a telephone call, an email, letters. The only occasion I recall meeting him was when my wife and I attended the funeral of his father. So there was no friendship. There was no connection. So that's just an unfortunate allegation. With respect to my connection with the Trudeau Foundation, when I was asked to do this, I asked the retired Supreme Court of Canada Judge, Justice Frank Iacobucci, to review the matter, and he concluded there was no conflict of interest, nor an appearance of one. The Trudeau Foundation was something I respected much as a university president because it was one of the most important scholarships in the areas of social sciences and humanities, something we're discussing today in terms of improvements. And when I stepped down as Governor General about a year later, late 2018, I was asked if I would become a member of the association of the Trudeau Foundation, which is like shareholders of a company. And your duty is to attend the annual general meeting, nothing involved with decision making, in which case you receive an annual report, you approve the financial statements, you elect the auditors for the subsequent year, and you elect the board of directors. I participated, I think, in about four of those meetings, 3 of them or 4 of them by Zoom, and one which occurred in Ottawa, where I was there for about an hour and a half between meetings. So I was not a participant in the decision making. I was not a member of the board of directors. I had no particular influence on strategy or decisions. And this relates to an issue that occurred 2014, 2015 with the gift, and I joined it in 2018. So there's nothing there. And the final area of attack is somehow I can't be impartial or nonpartisan. And I simply say to that is that as a professor of law, I've chaired or served on somewhere between 2 and 3 dozen advisory committees to government, including recommended by a conservative prime minister to be governor general for 5 years and then extended by that government for another 2 years. At no time in any of those occasions was my integrity or my impartiality questioned. Why would it happen all of a sudden now with this particular mandate? Are there other people who can do it? Yeah. Are they going to be subjected to some kind of accusations? What troubles me about that most of all is this is a precious country. It's our responsibility to protect it, to be stewards of it. If you're asked to serve in a public service position, you don't say, well, I don't think I want to because, you know, it's a little uncomfortable when people criticize me. But it's a chilling effect when you have these kinds of allegations that are then carried that somehow suggest that you are part of a scheme or that you can't be trusted. I wrote a whole book about trust when I was Governor General called 20 Ways to Build a Better Country on Trust. And I did so because I'm concerned about trust in public institutions. And this kind of invective is what weakens our trust in our public institution, and it's precisely what our enemies want to see, to put our democratic institutions into disarray. This is a blessed country. I don't know of a country that comes close to us. The U.S. News and World Report does an annual survey of the most admired countries in the world. Guess what? Canada is usually in first place or the top 2 or 3. Why is that so? It's because we've been able to make this interesting experiment in diversity and inclusivity work for all Canadians. That's precious, and it's precious because the values that underline who we are and how we govern ourselves are good ones and ones that must be protected very vigorously. And that's why I'm really quite prepared to do the next 5 years and to make my contribution with our team on how we improve our systems of dealing with foreign influence.
Mr. Johnston, thank you.
Great to be with you, Omar, as always. Thank you.